The neighborhood looked like something pulled straight from a glossy real estate magazine. Rows of freshly painted houses lined the cul-de-sac, lawns manicured to near-military precision, mailboxes standing proud as if they too were part of some unspoken competition. Every morning, the same ritual repeated, neighbors in pressed clothes waved politely, sprinklers clicked on schedule, and cars gleamed in driveways under the sharp suburban sun. On the surface, this was paradise. Families bought into it believing they were escaping chaos, trading city noise for backyard barbecues and quiet nights. But underneath the polished smiles and pristine hedges, something rotten had begun to fester. A shadowy authority had crept in, one that nobody had voted for, yet everyone felt the weight of. They called themselves the Community Enforcement Committee. No official documents confirmed their existence, no bylaws had ever been amended to give them power. They were simply a group of middle-aged neighbors who one day decided they had the right to enforce rules. Matching navy polo shirts gave them an air of legitimacy, clipboards in hand, as if paper and fabric could substitute for LAW.AT first, their presence was laughable. They strutted around like wannabe cops, peeking over fences, measuring grass length with rulers, snapping photos of garden gnomes as though documenting crimes. Most people brushed it off, rolling their eyes at the absurdity. But soon, their boldness escalated, they began issuing fines typed on cheap printer paper. $50 for a garbage can left visible after pickup day. $75 for unapproved holiday decorations. $100 for a patch of brown grass during a dry spell. These fines had no legal weight, but the committee relied on intimidation. They knocked loudly, demanded signatures, and hinted at legal trouble for non-compliance. Some neighbors, weary of confrontation, paid. Others ignored the papers, only to find final notices taped to their doors, written in red marker like some theatrical threat. A few who openly resisted woke up to mysterious misfortunes: tire tracks across their lawns, trash bags slit open and scattered, mailboxes dented. Fear spread faster than truth. Residents whispered, wondering if these officers had ties to the real HOA or even local law enforcement. Nobody dared to challenge them openly. That was until they set their sights on the corner house. The woman who lived there was the kind of neighbor everyone appreciated. Friendly without being intrusive, always ready with a smile or a casserole for a family in need. Her front yard was immaculate, her home well kept, yet she'd added something the committee didn't like: a modest planter box at the edge of her driveway. A rectangle of wood filled with soil, where she grew herbs and bright marigolds. Nothing extravagant, nothing disruptive, just a touch of personality in a neighborhood of copy-paste perfection, but to the committee, it was a violation. Not of any written rule, because none existed, but of their imaginary authority. They arrived one morning in their golf cart, clipboards ready, and marched up to her property. They stood in formation, puffed up chests, voices loud enough to draw attention. They waved papers, citing Section 12 and Community Standards Clause. Words that sounded official but were fabrications. The woman, polite yet firm, refused to sign anything. She reminded them she had checked the HOA bylaws when moving in. There was no mention of planter box. That should have been the end of it. But these men and women thrived on control, and defiance was a wound to their ego. One of them, the self-appointed leader, stepped forward. His face was red with anger, his voice rising with each word. He shoved the clipboard into her chest, demanding compliance. When she pushed it back, trying to de-escalate, his hand moved faster than anyone expected. A sharp crack echoed down the street. He had slapped her across the face. For a moment, the world froze. The neighborhood, usually alive with morning routines, seemed to hold its breath. A couple walking their dog stopped mid-stride, eyes wide. Curtains twitched as hidden witnesses peeked out. The woman staggered back. Shock etched across her features. The committee leader's chest heaved, his expression twisted not with regret but with smugness, as if he believed this act had cemented his power. His cohorts shifted uncomfortably, but none intervened. Intimidation had always been their weapon, and now they had crossed a line so severe that even fear might not shield them. The woman, trembling, retreated inside. She didn't shout, didn't retaliate. She simply closed the door. But within those walls, she knew she wasn't alone. Her husband, though often away for work, had returned just the night before, and he was not a man who tolerated bullies. The Community Enforcement Committee had no idea who they had just provoked. To them, he was just another suburban husband, another face among many. They didn't know about the years of training, the battles fought in places they'd never dream of, the discipline forged in fire. This man was a Navy SEAL, and the slap heard across the cul-de-sac had just set into motion a chain of events that would destroy the committee's fabricated empire. Inside the house, silence lingered. The woman touched her cheek, still burning from the strike. She wasn't weak, she wasn't the type to collapse under pressure, but she knew her husband. She knew the storm that was about to break, because if there was one thing stronger than his training, stronger than his discipline, it was his loyalty to her. And now that loyalty had been tested, the neighborhood didn't know it yet, but the days of the fake HOA cops were numbered. This was just the beginning. The husband had not expected to return home to chaos. For months he had been away, working in silence and secrecy, traveling through places that most civilians could not even pronounce, much less imagine. The suburbs were supposed to be his retreat, his breathing space, the calm after the storm. He had walked into his house the night before with the hope of rest. Of ordinary days with his wife, of slow mornings filled with coffee and laughter instead of strategy briefings and the endless drone of helicopters. Yet what greeted him instead was the one thing he had fought to shield her from: violence. When his wife closed the door behind her, after the slap had landed, her silence was louder than any scream. He saw her face, pale but resolute, the imprint of another man's hand still glowing on her skin. In that instant, everything inside him shifted. There was no yelling, no wild outburst, no immediate explosion. Instead, the room filled with something heavier, quieter, more terrifying: controlled fury. Years of training had taught him that anger unchecked was useless. But anger harnessed, anger sharpened, anger disciplined, that was a weapon. He sat her down, his mind already racing. He asked her nothing at first, because he didn't need to. He pieced it together in seconds: the group, the fake authority, the power they had stolen through fear. He had seen this before in other forms, in far darker places than suburbia. Bullies who mistook compliance for loyalty, who dressed up cowardice as order. They were never strong. They only looked strong until someone refused to bend. He looked out the window and saw them still patrolling the street, clipboards in hand, puffed up with false confidence. The audacity boiled his blood, but he knew better than to rush blindly. His wife touched his hand, a quiet plea for calm, but she knew the decision had already been made. He would act. The only question was when. That night, he walked the neighborhood under the cover of dusk, his presence unnoticed, his steps silent. He observed their routes, their routines, the way they carried themselves. He noted who was the loudest, who tried to look in charge, who lagged behind. Every detail was catalogued. He wasn't planning an attack, he was planning an exposure. He wanted them dismantled. Not just beaten. Neighbors spotted him occasionally, and those who knew whispered their relief. Word had already spread about the slap, about the humiliation delivered to his wife. Fear had reached its peak, but hope began to flicker. Some residents looked at him as if he were their last chance. And in truth, he was. The following morning, the committee returned to the corner house. Emboldened by their silence, they expected resistance, and when none came immediately, they mistook it for victory. But the husband was waiting. He stepped out onto the driveway, his presence sudden, sharp, impossible to ignore. He wasn't in uniform, didn't need to be. His stance alone carried authority. The committee froze for a moment, then began their usual bluster, waving papers and shouting about fines. He said nothing, just watched, his eyes unblinking, his silence louder than their noise. When they realized their intimidation was failing, one of them moved closer, clipboard raised like a shield. And that was when the husband decided the time for patience had ended. He took a single step forward, closing the distance, and the committee member instinctively stepped back. It was a small motion, but enough to tilt the balance. Everyone watching, from hidden windows, from cracked open doors, knew it. The tide had shifted. The Navy SEAL was home, and the neighborhood would never be the same again. That it happened faster than anyone expected. The committee leader, the same man who had struck the woman, was not about to back down. His pride had been bruised, his control threatened. He barked insults, tried to rally his group, but the confidence in their eyes wavered the moment the SEAL moved closer. He didn't shout, didn't posture, didn't need theatrics. He simply radiated the kind of strength that comes from experience, the kind you can't fake with polo shirts and clipboards. The leader, unable to accept the crack in his facade, made the mistake of reaching out, jabbing a finger into the husband's chest as if to prove dominance. The move was reckless. In less than a second, the SEAL's training took over. His hand shot up, locking the leader's wrist, twisting just enough to send him sprawling to the ground with a cry of shock. The clipboard clattered on the pavement, papers scattering like leaves. Gasps echoed from every hidden witness. The other committee members froze, torn between running and defending their fallen leader. One of them chose poorly. He charged, arms flailing, a clumsy attempt at aggression. The SEAL sidestepped effortlessly, using the man's momentum against him, sending him tumbling across the grass. Another tried to grab him from behind, but in one swift motion, the SEAL pivoted, elbow connecting with ribs, the air leaving the man in a wheeze as he collapsed to his knees. Within moments, the self-proclaimed enforcers were reduced to groaning figures on the ground, their once threatening presence shattered like glass. The SEAL hadn't even broken a sweat. He stood there, calm and composed, not gloating, not even speaking. His silence was a statement: these men were nothing. The neighbors, emboldened by the display, began to emerge. One by one, doors opened, curtains pulled back. They watched as the illusion of power crumbled before their eyes. The golf cart the committee had arrived in now looked ridiculous, abandoned and crooked at the edge of the street. The leader, clutching his wrist, spat threats through gritted teeth, but nobody listened. His authority had evaporated the moment he hit the ground. The SEAL helped his wife back inside, closing the door behind them, leaving the defeated bullies to gather themselves in the street. He didn't need to stay, the damage was done. The neighborhood had witnessed the truth: the committee wasn't strong. They were weak. Fragile, powerless against someone who refused to fear them. But the story wasn't over. Defeat bred desperation, and the SEAL knew men like that never accepted humiliation quietly. He prepared for what would come next. The confrontation spread faster than wildfire. Within hours, everyone in the subdivision knew what had happened. Stories circulated with embellishments, some claiming the SEAL had taken on all of them at once, others whispering he had snapped their bones like twigs. The truth was already dramatic enough, but rumor gave it wings. Soon, phones were out, shaky videos of the takedown uploaded online. The internet did what it always does: it amplified, exaggerated, and made the story viral. Strangers across the country watched the clip, cheering in comments, dubbing the SEAL a hero of suburbia. News outlets picked it up, headlines splashed across screens: fake HOA police humiliated by Navy SEAL neighbor. Meanwhile, the real police became involved. Reports were filed, investigations launched. It didn't take long to uncover the truth: the committee was a fraud. They had no legal ties to the actual HOA, no authority, no legitimacy. Their so-called fines were scams, their threats empty. Worse, background checks revealed a trail of shady behavior, complaints from previous neighborhoods, restraining orders, unpaid debts. The slap, caught on a neighbor's doorbell camera, sealed their fate. Assault charges were filed, and the leader found himself facing not just the wrath of neighbors but the weight of the law. The others scattered, trying to distance themselves, but the community had seen enough. Their names were tainted, their reputations destroyed. For the first time in months, the neighborhood breathed freely. Lawns bloomed again without fear of fines, kids rode bikes without being told they were against policy, and families gathered on porches without intimidation. The SEAL and his wife didn't bask in attention. They stayed quiet, private, content to have their peace restored. But everyone knew what they had done. Whispers followed them, not of fear, but of gratitude. The legend grew beyond their street. They became a symbol, proof that bullies collapse the moment someone refuses to bow. The fake cops were gone, their empire reduced to dust, their faces broken not just by fists but by truth. And the neighborhood, once suffocated by false authority, thrived again. The story lived on, retold in viral videos and late-night conversations, a cautionary tale for every would-be tyrant hiding behind clipboards and made-up rules. The moral was clear: fake power crumbles when real strength stands in its way. The SEAL had not just defended his wife, he had liberated an entire community. And the memory of that day, the day the fake HOA cops slapped the wrong woman, would never be forgotten.